Here we are at the magnificent Crathes Castle on Royal Deeside in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. This castle is associated with one family in particular, the Burnetts. And they originally lived in the south of Scotland, but at a critical stage in Scotland's history, they helped, as many other Scots did, they helped Robert the Bruce win the wars of independence against possible English domination. As a result, the family were rewarded by the king in 1323 with a grant of this royal forest so close to the River Dee. In 1323, when the Burnett family came to this part of Scotland, they originally lived in the middle of a loch on an artificial island called a crannog. But in 1530, Alexander Burnett married a girl called Janet Hamilton, and she came with considerable land and money. As a result, Alexander Burnett thought he would build a more substantial house here at Cratis, and the castle began to be constructed. By 1540, the walls of the castle were half built. But then there came another fortuitous marriage, this time to Catherine Gordon of Lesmoire, a local girl living not far from Cratis. She came with a substantial dowry too, and as a result, Alexander Burnett employed the Bell family of masons to finish off his castle in a spectacular style. And this they did with this wonderful roofline of towers, conical roofs, and waterspouts in the form of cannon. Here we are inside Crathes Castle in the Great Hall, the main living area for the Burnett family once they moved in here about 1570. I draw your attention to this remarkable object over the fireplace, which is the Horn of Lays, the badge of office, so to speak, of the Burnett family to show they were the royal foresters appointed by the king for this region of Aberdeenshire. Now I would like to tell you something about heraldry. I've mentioned the Horn of Lays specifically because the Burnett coat of arms, which you can see above my head, shows the Horn of Lays, and above it there are 3 holly leaves symbolizing the forestry role of the Burnett family. On the right-hand side are the coat of arms of Janet Hamilton, and they have both coats of arms have come together to show the arms of a married couple. In heraldry, a shield is described as having a field, and that field is normally colored. In the case of the Burnetts, the field is silver, on which there is a black horn and 3 green holly leaves. The Gordons of Lesmoire have a blue field on which there are 3 boar's heads in gold, 2 at the top and 1 at the bottom. And in between there is a band known as a fess, and this band has squares of blue and silver, so it's called a fess checky. There are certain shapes used in heraldry so frequently that they have become ordinary, and so they're known as ordinaries. The first ordinary is called a chief, and that occupies the top part of a shield. The next shape one comes across is a pale. That's simply a vertical band in the middle of the shield. Similarly, there is a fess, which is a horizontal band in the middle of a shield. The other common ordinary is the bend, which is like a bar running from the top left-hand side of the shield to the bottom right-hand side. We also have a chevron, which is a shape similar to a sergeant's stripe worn on uniform. And apart from these ordinaries, there are also sub-ordinaries, such as the saltire or St. Andrew's cross, the cross or St. George's cross, a shape called a pall, which looks like a Y on the shield. And we then have a curious one called a pear chevron throughout. Now, you may also be surprised to learn that there are very few colors in heraldry. There are metals and there are tinctures. There are 2 metals, gold and silver, and 4 main colors or tinctures: red, blue, green, and black. So the rule is a metal goes on a color or a color goes on a metal. And that always provides sufficient contrast for the design on the shield to be legible at some distance. Why was heraldry invented? You will see behind me a helmet, actually a Saracen helmet, and a Saracen coat of mail. Mail is made up of tiny little circles of interlocking steel, which gave the body protection. The helmet that you can see allows the face to be seen, so there was no problem recognizing an enemy. But a new form of helmet was invented to prevent facial injuries occurring, and this was known as a closed helm. It covered the face completely, so that immediately there was a great problem. How did one recognize your foe, and more particularly, your friend? Something had to be done to distinguish individuals. Over the coat of mail, men wore a short, sleeveless surcoat, again a French word just meaning an overgarment, and it kept the worst of the weather off the expensive mail. Somewhere in Belgium, possibly where Flanders lies today, someone came up with a bright idea of painting a design on the surcoat. And so the expression, a coat of arms, came into existence. It literally was a garment with a specific design unique to one individual, so that he was instantly recognizable on the battlefield. Once the idea of a coat of arms had been accepted universally, it was quickly realized that the design could be painted or embroidered on all the accoutrements used by a mounted knight in the late 12th century. His horse, for example, was given a degree of protection with a cloth covering called a caparison, and the caparison could be also painted with the heraldic design. This meant, on the battlefield, from a distance, the knight would be instantly recognizable both by enemy and by friend. And of course, when Western European knights went out to the Holy Land in the 11th century wearing a steel helmet, under a hot sun, it became extremely warm to wear. So the knights noticed that the locals, the Arabs in the region, kept cool by wearing a head covering called a burnous. Seemed to keep them cool. So they adopted the idea, covered their helmets with a piece of cloth, which we now call mantling, and that is held in place by a circle of material called the wreath, which is jammed down on top of the helmet to hold the mantling in place. When a man with a coat of arms marries a lady who has a coat of arms, each of their own arms are brought together on a shield, which is divided down the center, and the two coats are impaled together. And this is known as impalement. And here we have many examples in Crathes Castle of husband and wives heraldry together. Usually above the shield, one can find a helmet. And there are 4 different types of helmet used in British heraldry. But for an ordinary gentleman, he has an all-steel helmet with no visor. Then for a person such as my chief, Jamie Burnett of Lays, who holds the barony of Lays, he has a steel helmet which is garnished with gold. It's just made a little more decorative. A knight of the realm has a steel helmet, but the visor is always shown open. And finally, there is a silver helmet with gold bars across the eyepiece, and that is used by peers of the realm. When knights began to practice their martial skills in tournaments, they decided to have an additional piece of identification called the crest, which was attached to the top of their helmet. And that could be in the form of an animal, building a tower, a castle, or it could be a bunch of feathers. But the crest is really not the most important part of a coat of arms, although nowadays many people speak about crests when they're referring to the material on the shield itself. There is no such thing as clan heraldry in Scotland. Each chief of a clan or a head of a house has their personal arms, and any loyal member of the house or the clan is entitled to use the crest of their chief or head of house within a belt and buckle, which also carries the chief's motto. This stems from the medieval practice of having the chief's crest strapped to the arm with leather straps. That's where the idea comes from. Here we are in the Green Lady's room, which is reputed to be haunted because under this fireplace, bones were found during restoration of the castle. Above the hearthstone is an example of foreign decorative heraldry. It's a cast iron fireback made in France, dated 1596, and it shows the royal arms of France before the Revolution of 1798. 3 fleurs-de-lis. If this was painted, they would be in gold on a blue field. And it's surrounded by a collar made up of cockle shells. Underneath the collar is a little medallion showing the figure of St. Michael. So this was the French Order of St. Michael. The Scots called it the Order of the Cockle because of the shells around it. 1 or 2 Scots were actually given this order during the medieval period. Now we have moved up to the very top of Crathes Castle. This is known as the Long Gallery, and it was really designed for the family to have a place to exercise in the wintertime when the weather was too awful to walk in the grounds of the castle. So the family would walk up and down the Long Gallery and get their exercise that way. That was its sort of primary function. But this room was also used for another purpose. This room was used for the baronial court because the Laird of Lays had the authority from the crown to sit in judgment on small arguments taking place within the Lays estate. So if neighbours had an argument over cattle straying onto other land, or someone stealing corn, or whatever, they could come here, the Laird would sit in judgment, listen to all the arguments, and decide if a punishment was necessary. The Laird had the right of pit and gallows. In other words, he could imprison the people, the person, in a pit or a closed room, or he could send them to the gallows, that he could have them executed. But that never happened here at Crathes Castle, because beside me is the court book dated 1623, recording some of the cases that were heard in this room. Here in the Long Gallery, this wonderful coffered ceiling is decorated with a main line of shields running from west to east, starting behind me with the Bishop of Salisbury, Gilbert Burnett, who was a cadet of the House of Leys. The next shield is one that we're all familiar with already. It's Burnett and Gordon of Lesmoire, which we saw in the Great Hall. The next shield along is an interesting one. This is the arms of the Seaton family, and the next shield along actually shows the arms of the Marquis of Hamilton. But this shield is unlike any we've seen so far because it's been divided into 4. This is in order to add other people's heraldry to the shield. The quarters, as they're known, are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. In this instance, 1st and 4th shows the cinquefoils of the Hamiltons, which we've already seen in other parts of the castle. Then we have the royal arms of Scotland, the ruddy or red lion ramping on his field of treasured gold, as it's been described. And the final, quite elaborate shield is a Burnett and Douglas marriage combination. The lower shields on the ceiling, the lower level, are different Scottish families that have married into the Burnetts, or the Burnetts have married into these families. So it's a good example of how heraldry is used in a very decorative way, but still giving an indication of pride in kinship or relationship, which in Scotland has always been a very important element of life. Adjacent to the long gallery is the Burnett family room. Now this room has a collection of objects, photographs, books, prints, painted heraldic shields relating to various members of the Burnett family, because it is an extended family. We have Burnetts in England, Canada, America, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. Also in the room there is a round turret, and part of the decoration there is a series of individual shields featuring the arms of certain members of the Burnett family, including George Burnett, who was of Craigmile, that's one of the branches of the Burnett family, and he was Lord Lion, King of Arms, during the late Victorian period, very interested in genealogy, but he made a great difference to the administration of heraldry in Scotland. And our current chief, Jamie Burnett of Leys, whose grandfather gifted this building to the National Trust of Scotland, is chief of the name of Burnett, and as chief, when he wears Highland dress, on his cap he can wear this badge, which consists of his crest, a hand pruning a vine tree, his motto, and 3 eagle's feathers, which symbolize a chief. A chieftain has only 2 feathers, and an armigerous gentleman, that is someone who's entitled to bear arms, he only has 1 feather. We have now moved to the 9 Nobles room. This is one of 3 rooms in Crathes Castle where the ceilings have been decorated, possibly towards the end of the 16th century. But this room concentrates on the 9 nobles, or 9 worthies as they were called in Scotland, 3 of them from the biblical period, namely King David, Judas Maccabeus, and Joshua, the great fighting king. 3 nobles from the classical period, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Hector of Troy, and 3 more modern heroes, starting with King Arthur, Charlemagne, who combined Europe almost into one kingdom in his day, and final hero is Godfrey de Bouillon, who after the Crusades became the first king of Jerusalem. All of these themes and virtues, it's a kind of an educational exercise that the Burnett family are sharing with any friends who came to visit them, servants who worked in the house, or even the family themselves. Youngsters would be shown these heroes and asked to live up to their kind of character. Each of these figures are depicted in costume or in armor, and underneath there is a shield of arms. But of course they all lived before heraldry was invented, so coats of arms have been invented for them. They're spurious coats of arms. Some of them are obvious. King David has a harp on his shield because, of course, he was a harpist. They've been well preserved because as fashions changed, people wanted plaster ceilings. So great laths of wood was simply nailed onto the beams, and thus the painted ceilings were protected until they were accidentally discovered at the end of the Victorian period. We have now moved into the Laird's bedroom, and the main exhibit in this room is this absolutely remarkable bed commissioned by Alexander Burnett of Leys for him and his wife Catherine Gordon of Lesmoire. They had so good use of their personal heraldry, and this bed is no exception, because as they lay on this bed they could look up under the tester, and each coat of arms is featured along with the date, and elements from their coat of arms is also featured. There's holly leaves from the Burnett shield and checkies from the Gordon of Lesmoire arms. Alexander also commissioned 2 chairs, one for himself and one for his wife. His chair is slightly taller at the back and carries the Burnett coat of arms. Her chair slightly lower in the back with the Gordon of Lesmoire arms. But they were very conscious of the decorative quality of heraldry, and that's why they used it so extensively throughout the castle. Beside me is a fire screen, which in the past, ladies who were very concerned about their complexion, if they were sitting near a fire, they could put this screen in front of the fire and stop the heat making any changes to their delicate complexions. But it's interesting because it's a banner which has been mounted in this to make it the fire screen, and it shows the complete Burnett achievement. Now that is the phrase used to describe not only the shield, but the crest, the motto, and these figures, one human, one animal, and they support the shield, so they are called supporters. And the supporters always stand on a piece of ground known as the compartment. For example, the Duke of Argyll, chief of the Campbells, his compartment is covered in bog myrtle, which is the clan plant badge of the Campbells. The shield also shows something else, because as I've already mentioned, no 2 people can have the same shield. So the chief of the Burnetts had a son in this instance, and this is actually the coat of arms of the son, and we know that because the shield has been changed. It's been differenced with this strip. This is known as a label of 3 points. In this case it's red. If this man also had a son, he would be the grandson of the chief, so the grandson has a label of 5 points so that he doesn't have the same shield as his father. Now, I've already mentioned that in the family room there is a print showing different Burnetts. Each Burnett shield must be different from the next, and one of the ways of differentiating that is to put the arms within a border round the shield. There are hundreds of variations of coats of arms, and as time goes on, one has to have more and more variations in order to make the shield different. On the continent, particularly in Germany, they don't have the same concern about differencing as we have. We think it's important here in Scotland because it shows the kinship between the chief of the name and the individual. In Germany, members of a family can all use the same coat of arms, so you don't know which member of the German family you're dealing with. All very confusing. Sadly, we have come to the end of our tour around this wonderful building, Crathes Castle. Beside the castle is a superb garden filled with topiary and colourful flowers. And the garden and castle are themselves set in the rolling landscape of royal Deeside. On a glorious day, there is no spot on earth to beat it. We have seen heraldry in many forms, particularly in the long gallery upstairs, where Burnett familial relationships are beautifully symbolized with impaled coats of arms. I have tried to explain to you some of the mysteries of the science of heraldry, because I do hope you will come to Crathes Castle yourselves and see this magnificent building in its superb setting. Do come and visit bonnie Scotland.